July 7th, 1944, just over a month after D-Day. A narrow back road wound through the countryside near the quiet French village of Les Dupes. The afternoon light hung thick with the residue of battle, a haze of smoke and mist that blurred the horizon into something dreamlike, almost unreal. The air smelled faintly of wet soil and cordite. Overhead, the sky sagged low and gray, as if the weight of the world itself were pressing down. Private Thomas Hawkins crouched behind a shattered hedgerow, his breath shallow and uneven. He was 24, a farm boy from Lancaster, Pennsylvania, mud still clinging to the cuffs of his uniform like the soil of home that refused to let go. His face was streaked with grime and sweat. A thin line of blood traced down from a cut above his right brow, mixing into the dirt like ink on old parchment. In front of him stood the battered remains of a 57 mm anti-tank gun. Its sighting scope had shattered earlier that morning, leaving the crew to aim by instinct and memory alone. 4 armor-piercing shells remained, no radio, no backup, no orders. Somewhere beyond the fog, a low, rhythmic rumble began to rise. It was a sound you didn't just hear, you felt it, deep in your ribs, a growl of steel rolling over earth. German Panzers, multiple units, at least 10, maybe more. The sound grew louder, steadier, until the ground itself began to tremble beneath their approach. Those tanks were cutting through the northern countryside faster than anyone had predicted. Their course was straight and merciless, aimed directly at the narrow road Hawkins was guarding, the only supply route feeding the Allied forward position. He knew what that meant. If the line broke here, the infantry behind him, hundreds of men, would be caught in a steel trap. No chance to retreat, no anti-tank support, no way out. Just mud, fear, and a handful of shells. He rested his cheek against the cracked metal of the cannon, the steel cold against his skin, and drew a long breath. "If I get one shot," he whispered, not to God, not to command, but to himself, "I'll make it count." What unfolded in the next 9 minutes would become one of the most remarkable and nearly forgotten stories of the Normandy campaign. Thomas Hawkins had not been born for war. He came from a small dairy farm outside Lancaster, Pennsylvania, where the horizon stretched wide and slow, and time moved to the rhythm of seasons, not gunfire. His father tended cattle. His mother kept 6 children moving with quiet precision, her hands always busy, her voice always calm. Thomas, the youngest, was a quiet, red-haired boy, thin as a fence post, observant as a fox. While other boys in Lancaster chased baseballs, Thomas wandered the woods, listening to the wind in the leaves and the hush of his own footsteps. On his 10th birthday, his father handed him a small .22 rifle and a rule that would shape his life. Never waste a shot. They hunted squirrels at dawn, the world, silent except for the hum of crickets and the pulse in their fingertips. "You don't shoot with your eyes, Tommy," his father would murmur. "You shoot with your gut." That lesson would return to him years later, on a nameless French road, with tanks bearing down like thunder. When the war crossed the Atlantic, Thomas didn't rush to enlist. He was mending tractors when the radio brought Roosevelt's words after Pearl Harbor. His older brothers had families and farms to run. He stayed behind, assuming the war would end before it ever reached him. But in March of 1943, the letter came. Selective Service Draft Notice. He packed one duffel bag, tucked a photograph of his dog, Rex, into his breast pocket, and boarded a train bound for Fort Benning, Georgia. Basic training was brutal. The red dust clung to everything, the air, the sweat, the soul. The Georgia heat pressed down like judgment. Sergeants barked until voices cracked, yet Hawkins endured. He wasn't the strongest or the fastest, but he never broke rhythm. He read the field like he once read the woods. When he fired, he didn't celebrate the hit. He studied it, recalibrated, fired again. His calm under pressure caught an instructor's eye, and he was transferred to anti-tank training. The Americans called it the 57mm gun, a slender cannon, easy to move, but capable of piercing armor when properly aimed. The British called it the 6-pounder. To Hawkins, it was simply the mule, stubborn, loud, and reliable. He learned every inch of it. He could strip and reassemble it blindfolded. He memorized the sound of its recoil, the way the shell's whistle bent through wind as it flew. By winter of '43, he could judge distance by echo alone. But even as skill became instinct, Hawkins never saw himself as a hero. In letters home, he wrote lightly, calling himself the man who keeps the mule fed. His mother always replied on Sundays, "Be brave, Tommy, but don't be reckless." He folded each letter and carried them in his chest pocket, close to his heart, a small shield of paper and love. By May 1944, his unit boarded a troop ship bound for England, 10 days across a restless sea. The bunks reeked of oil and salt. At night, the older soldiers whispered stories of German armor so thick that shells ricocheted off like stones skipping water. The word Panzer carried its own gravity, a kind of mechanical growl even when spoken softly. Hawkins listened in silence, imagining the shadow of those steel beasts moving through smoke and fire. He wondered what it would feel like to face one, just a small crew and a fragile gun between them and annihilation. In early July, the 29th Infantry pushed deeper into Normandy. The air smelled of rain and gunpowder. Officers moved through this camp rows, repeating the same mantra, "Break Hitler's wall, liberate Europe." Hawkins checked his weapon, packed his rations, and stayed quiet. He wasn't thinking of glory or flags, only of Pennsylvania nights, the sound of crickets, and whether he'd ever hear them again. 4 days later, he and his gun crew dragged their 57mm cannon through Normandy mud, muscles trembling, boots sinking. His heart pounded, not from fear, but from the weight of duty. Their sergeant had once said he was an ordinary man waiting for an extraordinary moment. That moment was now moving toward him on tracks of iron. Laid up lay still that morning, too still. The village nestled between hedgerows and narrow farm lanes, its stone cottages damp from the mist, their slate roofs glistening faintly. The air carried the scent of rain-soaked soil and smoke from distant fields. By July 7th, the Allied front had pushed inland from Utah Beach, breaking through the hedgerows inch by inch. The plan was clear: move south, cut off German reinforcements, secure the roads before they could regroup. But plans, like forecasts, rarely account for fate. Somewhere, someone had missed a crucial report. A German Panzer column was already moving north, fast. Private Hawkins and his crew had been assigned to hold the eastern approach into town. Their gun was placed near a tree line overlooking a narrow gravel road, a choke point if there ever was one. From there, they could see the road dip, curve, and vanish between walls of dense brush. It was hardly ideal. Flat ground, limited visibility. But it was all they had. They'd arrived under cover of darkness, setting up their gun by feel more than sight. All morning, they worked in silence, cutting brush, stacking ammunition, clearing retreat lines they prayed they'd never need. Then, sometime after 3 in the afternoon, the silence broke. At first, it was just a faint vibration, a hum beneath the soil. Then it grew, a shiver that climbed through their boots and into their bones. The kind of sound that doesn't announce itself, it warns. Hawkins froze, one hand resting on the cold steel barrel. His loader, Private Kenny, glanced up from the ammo box, eyes wide. "You feel that?" he whispered. The sound swelled. Engines. Not one, but many. A mechanical chorus rising from the distance, the grinding of treads, the groan of gears, the pulse of steel moving with intention. Hawkins stepped from behind the brush, lifting his field glasses. Through the haze, dark shapes began to emerge. Then came the sight. Black crosses painted on gray armor, Panzer-marked furs, advancing in formation, their hulls glinting faintly under the overcast sky. 3 abreast, maybe more behind them. Armored half-tracks trailed in their wake, followed by supply trucks, an entire column of iron and discipline. He counted quickly. 10 vehicles, at least, maybe 12. This wasn't a patrol. It was a full mechanized counterattack. The road they were guarding wasn't just a path. It was the artery of the Allied front line. If it fell, Leydup would be swallowed whole. Every man holding the town would be surrounded within minutes. Hawkins lowered his binoculars slowly. For a heartbeat, all he could hear was the distant grind of gears and the faint whisper of wind through the trees. The gun beneath his hand felt heavier now, almost alive, waiting. And in that stillness, somewhere between fear and resolve, Thomas Hawkins remembered his father's words. Don't shoot with your eyes, shoot with your gut. The air trembled again. The ground quivered beneath the weight of the approaching armor. He exhaled, long, steady, certain. Then the silence folded into the low thunder of war, returning once more to the fields of France. There was no time to radio for support, no distant hum of friendly aircraft overhead, no whisper of artillery on their side, only 4 men crouched beside a wounded cannon and a few remaining armor-piercing rounds. The weapon itself bore the scars of the day, its sighting scope cracked from a morning impact, its barrel still trembling from past recoil. The lens distorted the world, bending lines that needed to be straight, stretching shapes that were supposed to be square. They had reported the damage, but there were no replacements, no resupply coming down that lonely road. Hawkins turned to the others, his face calm, voice stripped of anything unnecessary. "We're not going to stop them all," he said quietly, "but we can slow them down." Private Kenny, sweat darkening the collar of his undershirt, swallowed before asking, "How many shells we got left?" 4. That's it. No one spoke after that. The silence had weight. Hawkins knelt beside the cannon, pressing one hand against the cold metal of the breech, as if listening for a pulse. Beneath his fingertips, he could feel the faint tremor of the ground, a rhythm like the heartbeat of something vast and mechanical drawing near. Somewhere beyond the smoke and ruined hedgerows, the Panzers were coming, steady as thunder rolling over the horizon. The air tasted of rust and rain. It coated his tongue with the flavor of iron and memory. He wasn't afraid, not exactly. What filled him was colder, sharper, something like resolve frozen into clarity. He knew no one else was coming. It was them, the gun, and the ticking seconds before steel arrived. When the first Panzer came into view, he didn't wait for orders. Private Thomas Hawkins had never fired a 57mm anti-tank gun in live combat, but he had practiced for this moment on muddy fields in Georgia, where the tree line was the only enemy, and the smoke from the horizon was just the morning fog. Out there, he'd rehearsed it 100 times, feeling the weight of the shell, the drag of the recoil. The difference now was the reality, the smell of diesel and cordite, the knowledge that this was no exercise. The lead tank rolled into view like a steel fist pushing through fog. It was a Mark Fief, 30 tons of iron and engineering, a 75mm cannon built for intimidation. Its armor could shrug off small arms fire like rain on a roof. The thing was designed to frighten, and it did. Private Kenny's gloved hands trembled as he lifted the first armor-piercing shell from the ammunition box, its dull surface catching a faint glint of light. Hawkins leaned into the cannon, peering through the cracked scope. The world warped in the glass, a distorted image of road and smoke. He shifted left, then right, still wrong. "We're blind," he muttered under his breath. "What do we do?" Kenny asked. Hawkins didn't answer right away. His eyes swept the terrain, the narrowing road, the small stone bridge about 200 yards ahead, the curve just beyond it. He noticed the damp patch near the far edge of the bridge, the way water shimmered through cracks after last night's rain. That's it, he thought. Not the tank, the road. Load it, he said. Kenny blinked. You sure? Nope, Hawkins replied, but I'm not waiting for permission. He dropped into firing position, bracing his shoulder against the cold steel. There was no sight now, no markers, just instinct and memory. He remembered hunting trips with his father, the quiet lessons about breathing, about feeling when to act instead of thinking it to death. He lined the barrel slightly right of the bridge's corner, drew in a breath that seemed to pull the whole world inside him, and exhaled. Firing. The cannon thundered. The recoil slammed into the dirt, shaking dust from the gun's frame. For a heartbeat, nothing happened. Then, impact. The shell struck just beside the bridge's support wall, shattering stone and loosening the roadbed. Earth crumbled into the stream below. Not a full collapse, but enough to wound the path. The bridge now sagged like a cracked bone, treacherous for anything heavier than a jeep. The lead Panzer saw it too late. The driver tried to brake, but momentum was merciless. The right tread slid over the weakened edge, tipping the vehicle slightly before it ground to a halt at an awkward angle. The great machine was stuck, blocking the road. Behind it came confusion. The second and third Panzers braked hard. One skidded sideways into a ditch with a shriek of treads. The third stopped just in time, but the line had broken. A column that once moved like a single organism was now tangled, blind, and exposed. Second shell, Hawkins ordered. He didn't aim at the disabled tank. Instead, his eyes found the fuel truck at the rear of the convoy, a vulnerable heartbeat waiting to be struck. He fired. The world turned white. The explosion ripped through the still air like a thunderclap. Fire climbed 20 feet high, curling in the wind, orange swallowing gray. The truck vanished in an instant, replaced by a pillar of flame. Heat washed over the men's faces even from their distant cover. Fragments whirled through the smoke, shredding nearby vehicles. One half-track caught fire, its ammunition igniting in sharp secondary bursts that echoed through the valley. In under a minute, the neat German column had dissolved into a snarling pile of chaos, flame, smoke, and sound. Kenny glanced at Hawkins, eyes wide. Holy hell, Tommy. Hawkins didn't smile. He was already reaching for the third shell. We're not done, he said. Smoke rolled across the road like a curtain, twisting and folding in the wind. The field beyond flickered with orange reflections, as if the sky itself were on fire. The once unstoppable column was now a knot, burning, tangled, and trapped within its own confusion. Hawkins didn't waste a second. The third shell slid into the breach. Kenny slammed it shut and ducked. Target, he asked. The one trying to turn around, Hawkins replied. Through the smoke, he'd spotted movement. A Panther tank, sleeker and more powerful than the Mark V. It had managed to back into a small clearing, its turret swiveling, trying to reverse out of the kill zone. If it escaped, it could flank the Americans, or worse, call in the Luftwaffe for support. Hawkins adjusted the cannon, measuring by instinct, feeling the weight of air and distance. No words, just the breath before the shot. The 57mm shell sliced through the haze and struck the Panther's rear armor. The explosion was smaller than the last, less fire, more force. Black smoke poured from the back. The engine coughed, lurched, and died. Now the shouting began. German voices barked commands short and sharp, echoing from metal hulls. Some soldiers jumped from their vehicles seeking cover. Others fired blindly into the trees, trying to hit ghosts. Just 4 Americans remained behind that battered cannon, with a handful of shells and fading cover. But Hawkins held something the Germans didn't: momentum. Every shot he took forced them to react. Every pause, every burst of flame, every sliver of hesitation in their eyes belonged to him. "Shell number 4, he called. Kenny hesitated. "We only got one left after this." "Then let's make this one count." Hawkins swung the barrel toward the center of the road. 2 tanks had become locked side by side, one clipping the other, while trying to escape the burning wreck ahead. Their tracks were tangled, perfect. He fired. The shells struck low, beneath the turret of the forward Mark V. Sparks flared, a bloom of fire beneath the belly. The tank rocked violently, shuddered, then went still. It didn't explode, it just died. 50 tons of silent iron lying dead in the middle of the road. Then came something Hawkins hadn't heard all day. Silence. No engines grinding, no shouted commands. Just the sound of fire crackling, of metal cooling, and sighing in the heat. Somewhere, ammunition popped softly in the distance, like corn on a stove. The Panzer column, the pride of the Wehrmacht's armored might, was now motionless. Pinned between a half-collapsed bridge and a wall of burning wreckage, its strength had become its prison. But Hawkins didn't relax. He stood slowly, eyes narrowing, toward the horizon. Too easy, too quiet. That's when he saw it. Through the drifting smoke, a shadow moved among the trees on the left flank. A lone panther, still mobile, crawling forward like a predator in tall grass. It crept through the undergrowth, silent but certain. It had seen the muzzle flashes. It knew where the shots came from. 1 shell left. The wind carried the faint metallic click of its turret turning, followed by the low growl of gears finding their bite, like an animal drawing breath before the pounce. The surviving panther crept through the tree line like a great cat, hunting in long grass. Slow, deliberate, almost graceful in its menace. Its turret moved in measured arcs, scanning every shadow, listening to the earth. Hawkins saw its intent immediately. It wasn't advancing down the main road like the others. It was climbing the eastern slope, circling to higher ground where it could strike from above. "Tommy, it's coming," Kenny whispered, his voice thin as wire. "I see it," Hawkins replied, his words steady but weighted with an inward chill pressing hard against his ribs. They had only 1 shell left, 1 fragment of hope rattling in an empty crate. The rest had already been spent, traded for time and smoke and silence. Now it came down to this: 1 shot, 1 breath, 1 chance. No backup, no artillery, no margin for error. The Panther would have them in its sights in less than a minute. Its 75mm high-velocity gun was capable of tearing through stone, trees, or steel alike. Hawkins crouched beside the ammo box and lifted the last shell. It felt different, heavier somehow, though his hands had carried dozens before. This one carried more than brass and powder. It held everything that remained of their stand, their faith, their thin defiance against the inevitable. He turned to Kenny, who sat frozen, trembling fingers hovering above the breach. "You with me?" Hawkins asked quietly. Kenny swallowed hard and nodded, though his lips quivered. "Then load it." The shell slid home with a heavy click. The breech locked shut with finality, a metallic sound that seemed to echo far beyond the hill. The gun was ready. So was the enemy. The Panther had reached its vantage point now. Its barrel cut through the smoke like a compass needle seeking north, steady, unwavering, pointed straight at the hedgerow that sheltered the 4 Americans. Inside its steel hide, the German crew would be guessing how many lay in ambush. A squad? A platoon? They'd soon find out. Then came the sound Hawkins dreaded most, that low electric whine as the turret locked on. The cannon's rotation was almost imperceptible, but the tone of its movement made his skin prickle. He didn't have a clean shot. The trees, the drifting haze, the uneven terrain, each conspired against precision. He stared through the fractured scope one last time and saw only ghosts and distortion. Then memory reached out to him, from years before the war, from the quiet woods of Georgia. His father's voice, low and patient, whispering over the smoke of an old hunting rifle. "You don't aim with your eyes, Tommy. You aim with your gut." He let that memory fill the silence. Slowly, he dropped to one knee, feeling the earth beneath his boots, the trembling heartbeat of the cannon beneath his hand. No sights, no markers, just instinct. He adjusted the barrel by feel, the way a man tunes a guitar in the dark. His breath slowed. The world narrowed until it was only rhythm and waiting. He exhaled, pulled the trigger. The cannon split the air open, one final thunderous note. For a moment, even sound seemed to flinch. Then came the answer, a single, solid impact. The shell found its mark, slicing into the Panther's left tread. The blast tore through the side skirt, cutting into the engine block deep within. The tank jerked violently, a mechanical groan rolling from its hull like a wounded animal. Smoke burst from its rear vents. The turret sagged sideways, then froze in place. The beast stopped moving. No explosion, no fireball, just stillness. The kind that settles when the fight has been drained completely out of a thing. Kenny collapsed beside the gun, breathless and half laughing. "You got it, Tommy. You got it." But Hawkins didn't answer. His hands remained fixed on the cannon, palms pressed against its scalding metal. His eyes locked on the smoking wreck across the field, as if waiting to be sure it wouldn't move again. For a long second, he allowed himself to breathe. They had done it. 4 shells, a broken sight, and nothing else. Somehow, against logic and odds, they had held the line. Yet he knew peace and war never came clean. It always had a price, always a shadow waiting just beyond the relief. The field had gone quiet now. No more engines, no more shells, only the whisper of flames devouring what they touched, and the distant murmur of wind brushing through the trees. Smoke drifted low across the road, folding itself through the hedgerows like mist over a river. Private Thomas Hawkins rose slowly, every motion stiff with fatigue. His uniform was caked with dirt and sweat. The back of his neck glistened, his right hand blistered from gripping the hot steel. His ears still rang from that final shot. Nearby, Kenny knelt, catching his breath, voice trembling. "Tommy, you did it," he managed. "You stopped them." Hawkins didn't answer. His gaze remained on the horizon, where twisted silhouettes of tanks lay still against the fading light. Their cannon was empty now, a battered relic standing in silence, but it had done its work. The quiet stretched thin, until it was shattered by a sudden shriek that cut the air in two. A sound every soldier knows. Incoming. The whistle of falling mortars sliced through the smoke. Hawkins barely turned before the earth erupted. The blast struck 10 yards away, close enough to lift him from his knees. The ground buckled, the air thickened with dirt and shock. He hit hard, his body tumbling beside the cannon. For an instant, the world was all dust and ringing silence. Then pain, sharp, burning, spreading. Kenny scrambled toward him, shouting, but his voice was distant, muted beneath the hum in Hawkins's ears. He felt hands on his shoulders, heard fragments of words. "Tommy, stay with me, stay with me." Hawkins blinked slowly, eyes glassy, yet awake. Above him, the sky stretched gray and endless, soft as ash. He tried to speak, but only a thin sound escaped, a breath caught between worlds. Kenny pressed down, tears streaking dirt on his cheeks. "Don't you leave, man. Not now. We'll get help. Just hold on." But Hawkins lifted one trembling hand. His fingers brushed Kenny's sleeve, gentle but firm, a wordless command. Then his gaze shifted, not upward, but sideways, toward the cannon still facing forward, still guarding. His lips moved once more. The words barely crossed the distance. Tell them. We held. His eyes didn't close. They simply stopped moving, still open, still fixed toward the smoke, as if keeping watch even after the noise had faded. Kenny sat beside him, refusing to let go until the medics arrived nearly 20 minutes later. They found the cannon unmanned, its metal scarred and blood-stained, barrel still smoking faintly from the final shot. And there, beside it, Private Thomas Hawkins, motionless, one hand resting on the breech lever, as if still ready to fire again. He never ran, never backed down, never looked away. By the time reinforcements reached the site, the sun was slipping behind the Norman hills, painting the sky with the dull glow of smoke and amber light. The air hung heavy with soot. The ground trembled, not with the thunder of tanks this time, but with the steady tread of infantry boots moving cautiously among wreckage. A scout jeep from the 79th Infantry Division rolled to a stop near the bridge. Lieutenant Randall Wood stepped out, his face drawn and quiet. What lay before him looked less like a battlefield and more like the aftermath of a storm. 12 enemy vehicles, 4 of them tanks, lay twisted and broken across the field. A fuel truck had been reduced to a blackened skeleton. Occasional bursts of ammunition popped in the distance, small echoes of a fight already decided. Woods turned to his radio operator. "This wasn't air support," he said. "No, sir. No airstrike was called." "Then what the hell did this?" The medics found Private Kenny sitting near a tarp-covered body. His hands were still red, his face hollow with exhaustion. One of the medics tried to move him, but he wouldn't let go of the man beneath the tarp, wouldn't speak, just stared forward, eyes glazed and jaw tight, as if holding something too sacred for words. When a chaplain approached and knelt beside him, he asked gently, "Did he go quick?" Kenny swallowed hard. His answer came out soft but clear. "He died standing. His ground." Lieutenant Woods ordered a full inspection of the site. His officers traced the craters, measured impact angles, examined the destroyed tanks. They found only one American gun emplacement, a single 50 mm anti-tank cannon, its scope shattered, its barrel caked in soot. No other positions, no sign of artillery. Just one gun, one crew. The numbers made no sense. 4 shells fired, 4 confirmed hits, each placed with surgical precision, each timed within seconds of opportunity, and all of it achieved without a working sight. The official after-action report would later read, "It is the assessment of this command that Private Thomas Hawkins, acting independently and using a damaged weapon system, successfully delayed and disabled an enemy armored column estimated at 10 to 12 vehicles, thereby preserving the town of WWII and preventing heavy American casualties." But reports don't capture sound. They don't tell how the air trembled when the last shell fired, or how the cannon seemed to breathe as the smoke rose into the darkening sky. The word began to spread like a low wind through the ruins of Normandy, first among the artillerymen who had seen the smoke from afar, then among tank crews swapping stories over ration tins, and finally all the way up through division headquarters. It began as whispers, uncertain and half-believed. "Did you hear about the red-haired farm boy with the busted cannon?" someone would ask. "The kid who stopped a whole German column with a single shot, aimed without a scope, just by feel." Most didn't believe it. How could they? Men didn't do things like that and live, or even die, without being noticed. And yet, no one could explain what they saw that day outside La Haye-du-Puy. The road was scorched, the trees shredded, the tanks, dozens of them, lay in ruin, and among it all, one silent gun, still aimed forward, still waiting. In the days that followed, that field became something else, part shrine, part legend. Soldiers passing through would stop for a moment, boots sinking into the soft French mud, to look upon the wreckage. Some just stood in silence, the way one does at a grave, Others murmured disbelief, tracing the twisted metal, as if searching for an answer in the steel. What had looked to German reconnaissance like an American strongpoint had been in truth one cannon crew, and by the end, one man, who refused to retreat. The story grew with each retelling. A sergeant from the 101st Airborne called it a one-man Alamo. A British tanker, leaning on a Sherman, called it madness, but blessed madness. A Canadian infantryman, moved by something he couldn't name, knelt beside the shattered gun, laid a ration biscuit on the breech, and whispered a quiet prayer for the bloke who didn't blink. Paperwork moved slower than rumor. It always does. It took 2 full weeks for the commendation reports to crawl their way through the chain of command, each one stamped, signed, reviewed, and sent further rearward. 3 more weeks passed before eyewitness accounts were compiled, battlefield assessments were confirmed, and ordnance teams verified every shell casing. The facts, impossible as they seemed, stood. A Silver Star was approved. Then, after deliberation, the Distinguished Service Cross, the second highest honor for valor under fire in the United States Army. By then, Private Thomas Hawkins was already buried. His comrades laid him to rest beneath the quiet skies of the Normandy American Cemetery near Colleville-sur-Mer, Plot D, Row 23, Grave 18, a white marble cross. The inscription was simple, PVT, Thomas J. Hawkins, Pennsylvania, July 7th, 1944, 24 years old. The telegram reached his mother in Lancaster County first, delivered by hand, as all such news was. The knock on the door was enough. She didn't need the words. Then came the medals, carefully wrapped in brown paper, followed by the letter found in his breast pocket, blood-stained but still legible. It was dated July 6th, the day before the ambush. The handwriting was steady, deliberate, almost peaceful. "Dear Ma," it began, "by the time you read this, I'm deep in France. They say we'll be pushing forward soon. Everyone's scared, though they won't admit it. Me too, I guess. I just want to do my part and come home. If I don't, I hope you won't cry too hard. I'm not writing this because I think I'll die. I'm writing it because I've seen good men do brave things. And if the time comes, I want you to know I tried. If I don't come back, tell Dad I remembered the squirrels. He'll understand. Love always, Tommy." His mother kept that letter tucked inside her Bible for the rest of her life. The edges yellowed over time, but the words never faded. Years later, when a war memorial was unveiled in Lancaster County, she stood there in quiet dignity. She didn't cry. She simply looked at the stone, gloved hand brushing her son's name, and said softly, "He was never reckless. He just didn't wait for permission to do what was right." Decades rolled forward like tides. The war ended, Europe rebuilt, the world shifted and spun. But the story of Thomas Hawkins did not fade away. It found its place among the oral traditions of soldiers, told in barracks, boot camps, and bivouacs. Instructors at artillery schools would recount it not as a tale of legend, but as a lesson. Improvised aim under combat duress, the manuals called it. At Fort Sill, Oklahoma, young artillerymen would one day be shown a diagram of the Normandy ambush site. The caption read simply, "Hawkins' position." There was no mention of heroism, no embellishment of the man himself, just the geometry of the field, the angles of the gun, and the proof that even broken instruments can still find their mark when guided by something steadier than sight. He was never famous. No movie bore his name. No statue captured his likeness. But among those who understood what it meant to face down a Panther tank with nothing but iron will and worn steel, his name carried quiet weight. In Normandy, the locals remembered him too. The road where it happened was later renamed in soft tribute, Chemin du Canon Solitaire, the road of the lone gun. There was no ceremony, no mayor's speech, no marching band, just a wooden sign nailed to an old post, standing where poppies bloom every July. Each year, on the anniversary of that battle, a small group of French schoolchildren still comes to lay flowers near the hedgerow. Most of them don't know the full story. How could they? But their teachers tell them in simple words, "One man stood here. Because he stood, we are free." And that is enough. There's a temptation when hearing stories like this to file them under legend, to assume they've grown taller with time, that no single man could stand against the armored wrath of the Wehrmacht and endure. But history is often stranger and humbler than myth. Wars, for all their scale and strategy, are not always decided by generals or maps or air raids. Sometimes they turn on small, almost invisible pivots, moments of stubborn courage when one person refuses to yield. Private Thomas Hawkins was one such pivot. He wasn't larger than life. He didn't possess perfect aim or unshakable confidence. He wasn't trying to carve a name into history. He simply did what his conscience demanded when everything else fell apart. His weapon was outdated, his scope shattered, his team scattered, but his resolve held, unyielding, unbreakable. That resolve didn't come from rank or training. It came from something deeper, from memory, from roots, from the echo of a father's voice in the back of his mind. Never waste your shot. It came from long afternoons in Pennsylvania fields, chasing small game under open skies, learning not to aim with your eyes, but with your sense of stillness, with instinct, with heart. When the world narrowed to smoke and thunder, he aimed not with calculation, but with belief. And that belief struck truer than any sight could. He didn't just stop a column of tanks. He stopped fear itself, held it back for one breath longer, one heartbeat more. In that instant, courage changed the course of a day, and perhaps a few dozen lives who might otherwise never have seen home again. Because courage, when stripped of medals and myth, is not noise or fury. It's the quiet refusal to look away. And Hawkins, in that final moment, did not look away. His story reminds us that the battlefield isn't always a stretch of land. Sometimes it's a single decision, a held breath, one act that no one witnesses, but that changes everything. He made his choice, and it counted. And in doing so, he left behind not just a victory, but a lesson. That courage does not require witnesses, only conviction. Some say legends fade, but in Normandy, when the wind passes over, that quiet country road and the poppies rustle in the summer light, you can almost hear the faint metallic echo of a cannon cooling in the dusk, still aimed forward, still holding its ground.